Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. We're starting today off in Founder's Forge, but I am done making changes to the town for the moment. I think what I want to do today is something a little bit more technical, and it involves a farm that we made a little while ago, but that we haven't done much with since. The slime farm. And yes, I have a lot of slime now. The top chest has been collecting them occasionally, but the bottom chest is almost full up of slime balls, and for that purpose we are going to bring... Oh, we have a crafting table over here already. We can add this one to the stack of shame. No, today we're going to be crafting these into slime blocks, because I want to start taking a look at slime blocks and how they can be used in your world to great effect. So we're going to take a kind of introductory look at slime blocks today, but the possibilities for using these things, especially in redstone contraptions, is quite phenomenal. So we're going to make ourselves a few stacks of slime blocks, and I also just want to empty out the farm that we have over here, because as you can see, slime is still trickling into this thing every now and again, and I kind of want to make sure that we have a little bit of space in the chest. So I'm going to convert all of this into slime blocks, and then we're going to see what we can do with these things. There we go, I've emptied out the chests for the slime farm. We might see a little bit more flowing in, but in the meantime, I've got myself 6 stacks and change when it comes to these slime blocks, and I've been using slime balls occasionally to make sticky pistons here and there, but we haven't needed a huge number of those, so this slime has mostly been sat here unused, and we are going to put it to good use today. We're going to run this thing through its paces. Now, if you're familiar with the Minecraft wiki and have used it to look up information, you may have read this about slime blocks. The first line on the Minecraft wiki is, "A slime block is a transparent block that the player can bounce on." This is true. Slime blocks are transparent and you can bounce on them, but the transparency is a little bit kind of weird. It's a little different compared to other transparent blocks, not least because slime blocks, unlike other transparent blocks, can have torches placed on them, they can conduct redstone power. Generally speaking, they will let light through them as well, much like other transparent blocks will. Like if I put that torch down there, it will still be registering as block light when we step on top of this here. So that's 12 block light. Like the torch light is not diminished at all by the slime block being there. So there is some interesting stuff you can do with slime blocks that we'll get onto shortly. But in the meantime, let's actually get onto the stuff it was saying about players being able to bounce on them, because that in itself is a really interesting thing to use. I'm going to place a couple of slime blocks down here on the ground, and let's see if we can use them as a bit of a bounce pad. Now, you're not going to be able to bounce the full height that you drop when it comes to these things. They will usually bounce you up like roughly a third of your original jump height. It totally depends on how fast you're falling, which depends how many blocks height you are falling from. But there is a hard limit on this. If you drop from build height onto a bunch of slime blocks, you're only going to bounce up maybe about 50 blocks or so. I think the maximum height you can do is about 57 blocks or something like that. So it's really not like, it's not something that you can use to bounce from world height back up to world height. But even so, if you drop onto some slime... Oh, I dropped onto the edge of some slime blocks there and it didn't count. Oh, that was a terrible demonstration. Let's try that again. If you fall onto slime blocks from a great height and you aren't pressing any other buttons, you can use them to bounce up pretty high. It will actually get you relatively high when you bounce the second time. Obviously, that diminishes as your bounce height diminishes until eventually you'll come to a complete stop. And you'll notice that falling onto slime blocks that way meant we didn't take any fall damage, so that can be a kind of useful mechanic to use. Now, bear in mind, there are a couple of additional things when it comes to falling onto slime blocks that you need to remember. One of which is that if you hold the space bar to jump, in my case, you activate your elytra, which again is not something I plan to do. Maybe best if we take the elytra off for this demonstration, but if I hold the space bar as I'm falling, I actually just jump once. Like, the jump height is reduced to the amount of height that you would normally get from jumping, and that means you can actually use slime blocks to stop your fall and avoid bouncing like that if you remember to hold the jump button. While I've got my feather falling boots on, I can demonstrate the other thing, where if you crouch while you're falling onto slime blocks, you don't actually bounce at all, and you do take the regular amount of fall damage. So the properties of slime blocks are actually basically removed if the player is crouching. I think you will still be bounced by them, but you will not bounce on them. Also, you move a little bit slower when you're walking on slime blocks, in a similar way to how you move when you're on soul sand, and mobs will do the same thing. So notice that the zombies that are conveniently demonstrating this for us, once they get onto the slime blocks, they actually start to move really slowly. For another fun variation on this, it's worth noting that slime block bounce mechanics aren't affected if they have stuff placed on them that is a sub-slab level. I mean, like, it depends entirely on the block. Like, stuff like carpets in particular are a good example. Carpets will not affect the bounciness of slime blocks in any way. Obviously, something a little bit larger, like a daylight sensor, or a slab itself would break your fall and would cause fall damage if you fell onto it. So stuff like carpets, rails, string, redstone, that kind of stuff can all be placed on here. Trapdoors, that kind of stuff can all be replaced on a slime block. Most things that are less than a half block will still allow you to bounce on the slime blocks. I think even pressure plates can be bounced on, and the pressure plate will activate when you drop onto it. So that's kind of a neat example. But I'll show you here from a height. I've made a little target with the slime blocks down there. I'll try and land carefully on here, and then we can drop down onto this. The carpets are on it, but I still bounce pretty high. One other fun thing with slime blocks while we're looking at player interaction with them is that they can be broken instantly, which you might think makes them good for scaffolding, but you'll notice while we're up here, my view is vibrating a little bit. Like the amount of motion that you have on slime blocks is kind of constant. So you will constantly find this like jiggling effect if you're standing on it without crouching. Once you crouch, it will stabilize a little bit, but you'll find that can get a little bit annoying. Also, if you break it too fast, you can actually take fall damage because you're breaking the block faster than it can be, like faster than you're falling. So you can break all of the blocks underneath you and actually fall down onto the ground if you're scaffolding with this stuff. So it's usually best to use something else like stone or netherrack or whatever you've got to hand that can be broken nice and quickly. If you're playing in the Java snapshots right now, or if you're playing on Bedrock at the time of this recording, it is actually likely that you might be scaffolding with actual scaffolding blocks, which are being introduced in the next update at the time of this recording, but I don't get to play with them quite yet because I'm not upgrading this world until a full release of that one comes out, so I'm going to have to wait for scaffolding. The bouncing effect doesn't apply to all entities though, because you'll notice if I drop some blocks onto there, they just start to collect in a stack, but even if I'm dropping individual blocks, they won't bounce in the same way that players and mobs do. So it doesn't apply to all entities, it just applies to mobs and players in particular. I'm pretty sure armor stands are affected by this as well. Let me find out really quick. Let's do a quick test drop of this armor stand onto the slime blocks, and yes, they bounce. So they're actually quite good for testing the trajectory of slime blocks if you want something nice and easy to bounce that's not going to wander off when you decide to put it on a slime block. Now, it's when you combine slime blocks and pistons together that slime blocks really start to come into their own and become very, very interesting. So to demonstrate, I'm going to put a piston in the ground here, have a button there to activate it on the block next door, and we're going to place a slime block on top of that. Now, when we press this button, you'll notice the slime block remains in midair. So we would need a sticky piston if we want the slime block to be retracted. And watch what happens when we place a cobblestone block adjacent to one of the faces of the slime block. It actually sticks to the slime block, and that moves the cobblestone block as well. You can do this with basically as many blocks as it is possible to attach to the face of the slime block, and if you want to add more, you just add more slime blocks, like so. And those all move in sync. So that way, it is possible to move a whole bunch of stuff attached to a single piston by gluing it to slime blocks. Now, there is a limit to this because a piston can still move a maximum of 12 blocks. It can't move any more than 13. So if, for example, we put a 12 slime blocks attached to the same piston, like so. If we take out the floor around them, you should still be able to move this entire cube of slime blocks like that. But if we attach a single additional slime block, it won't move because it's trying to move more than 12 blocks, even though they are not 12 like vertically adjacent blocks. It's still trying to move more than 12 blocks with the power of a single piston, so that will not work. But of course, once we start adding blocks in that are not slime blocks, as long as they are attached to these slime blocks, then they can all move, and they will be moved around like normal. So it's actually really interesting the combinations of stuff you can move using slime blocks alone. Note that slime blocks need to be able to stick to themselves to move stuff in such a giant mass. So for example, here, this slime block here, even though it's going to be pushed up by the piston, is not going to stick to the stone when the piston gets pulled back down. It's going to be left there floating in the air. It does need another slime block to be attached to it, maybe like so. If we pull a few slime blocks up like that, that should now drag that slime block back down because it's adjacent to another slime block. So they do need to kind of be stuck together in a row in order to move a large amount of stuff back and forth. In order to be pulled, you need to have it be pulled by another slime block. While I'm out here, I decided we may as well try and get another creeper into the record farm, because we haven't had any new music discs for a while. So let's see if we can lure Jim Bob over here over the pressure plate. Got one! Hey, I'm glad this thing still works. Let's open it up. T-Bone's having trouble tracking me today. Nope, there we go. Looks like he's got a bead on me now. Yes, that's right. More music discs are always going to be fun. There we go. One more record for our collection, and it is Ward. Did we get this one already? I think we might have this one already. Never mind. Well done, T-Bone. You did your job, as you were. Now, going back to the aforementioned bouncy properties of slime blocks, if you use a slime block and a piston, you can actually bounce mobs, entities, and players on it. So let's use the armor stand here as an example. If I press the button attached to this piston, it's going to rocket the slime block up, and the armor stand bounces into the air. And this is possible with players as well. So if I stand on this, hey, there we go, I get launched. And this is actually a fun way of getting into the air. For example, if you want a nice, easy elytra launch, just set up a slime block launcher and activate your elytra midair, and you're away. It's a nice, easy way of doing that. A while ago, I even set up this very simple bounce pad to get me between two levels of my villager trading hall, and all I need to do is step on this pressure plate, walk over onto the slime blocks. The entire thing catapults me into the air, and if I'm moving fast enough, I'll actually get over enough that, there we go, I can get up to the second level. These things aren't super reliable though, especially in multiplayer worlds. Occasionally, your entity position in the world, your player position, won't quite adapt to the slime blocks fast enough, and you'll find yourself falling through the slime block pad and suffocating in the slime blocks. Luckily, they're nice and easy to remove with a single punch. You don't need tools for it or anything, so most of the time that shouldn't be a problem. But it may be something you want to replace with water columns or some other form of elevator if you're not all that keen on it. However, if you want to bounce around your world a whole bunch, then there's no better way than slime blocks. Now, you might notice that when I step on this pressure plate, the surrounding blocks, for example, these wooden ones around here, all move with the slime block pad, but these two don't. And that's because they are furnaces. Furnaces and chests and other items that have the option to have items in them, to have some kind of capacity, can't really be moved by slime blocks or pistons in this edition of Minecraft. It is possible to move them, I think, in Bedrock Edition, or at least chests and stuff can be moved around with pistons, but right now it's not possible to move furnaces. And so for that reason, they are one of the cheapest blocks that you cannot have affected by slime blocks if you want to build a slime block launcher. And that's kind of a useful thing, because here, all of the blocks immediately adjacent to the slime blocks are getting moved, and that would mean that if we had a pressure plate stood right here, then these blocks would move as well if they weren't something that was immovable. And the concept of movable or immovable blocks is actually quite important when considering how to build with slime blocks, because as I mentioned before, slime blocks will drag blocks with them, which if you're using them for redstone contraptions and stuff like that, that might not be what you want. Now let's say, for example, we have this sticky piston trying to move these two slime blocks horizontally. Normally that's not a problem if there are no blocks adjacent to the slime blocks anywhere except for the piston itself. But once we start to attach blocks around the outside, that stuff starts moving. And say, for example, we want this to be hooked up using redstone wire. If we have some redstone sat on this block, let's use a button here as an example, it's going to pop off the block as soon as the block moves, because redstone doesn't like to be moved, and redstone components are pretty much the same. Now, you can use immovable blocks, things like obsidian, let's use that as an example, to actually allow for redstone blocks to be stationary, sort of redstone dust and stuff to be placed around the outside of a slime block mechanism like this, without it being moved at all. You'll notice that the obsidian here is not affected by the slime blocks, it's not being grabbed by them and moved at all. Obsidian is one of the many immovable blocks. It's also worth noting which redstone components will interact with slime blocks. For example, observers can be pushed and pulled around with slime blocks, and that actually causes a block update in the observer because it's changing which air block it's looking at. So you can use that for some redstone contraptions just by moving slime blocks around. And we're going to look at one of those towards the end of the episode, which is kind of the backbone of a lot of mob farming and other interesting farming techniques we can look at. but things like daylight detectors, for example, are not affected by the grip of slime blocks and are in themselves immovable. For example, I can't even push this one using the slime blocks on the end of a piston here. Another example of blocks that have an interesting interaction with pushing mechanics and slime blocks in particular are leaves, which can be used to coat the outside of a slime block contraption, but note that if you push them with a piston, or in this case a block attached to a piston, the leaves themselves will actually break, meaning that they won't be there the next time around. So yeah, it's an interesting application and one that has a few uses when it comes to slime block contraptions. Now there is one important and notable exception to all of these pushing mechanics, and that is glazed terracotta, which can be made by smelting any terracotta block except for regular raw terracotta. Any dyed terracotta block can be glazed by smelting it in a furnace. In this case, this orange terracotta turns into orange glazed terracotta, which has a pattern like this, and it's kind of interesting. You can make these really neat kind of 2x2 designs with it, like this one that can kind of look like a flower pattern, but glazed terracotta will be pushed by pistons but cannot be moved by adjacent slime blocks. Let's use that as an example here. So we'll put a terracotta block there and there and there. Now, unlike the leaves, that terracotta block is actually going to be moved, but it will not be pulled back by the slime blocks, and these two terracotta blocks were not affected at all. So glazed terracotta is a more accessible block than obsidian if you want something that can't be pulled around by slime blocks, but it can also be pushed by slime blocks. So bear that in mind if it's attached to a piston. If it's kind of at the end of one of these kind of push actions that the slime blocks are doing, then that's going to mean that that block gets pushed around, but it doesn't get pulled around after that point. Before we go any further, it's also worth noting that slime blocks can bounce stuff sideways, like so, and that item entities are affected by pushing with a slime block in a way that they aren't affected by throwing items down onto a slime block and seeing them bounce. For example, I can propel this glazed terracotta quite some distance, and if there was an ice road here, if there was like a bunch of packed ice or blue ice laid down here, then that would travel for quite a distance. So actually using these to propel items around is not an unfeasible thing, although if I could actually drop an item onto the block, that would be helpful. And the last thing we're going to cover in this video is something that, to be honest, I don't know a great deal about, because I haven't used them a huge amount in my world previously, but I felt like it was important to cover them at this point in the series because we're going to be using one in the near future. And that is using slime blocks in combination with sticky pistons and other redstone components. In this case, we're going to be using observers and a couple of things to trigger this. It is possible to create effectively what is a flying machine in Minecraft. Now, I'm not talking about like a plane or something like that, although you can sort of make them look like planes if you know what you're doing. I'm talking about a machine that is able to fly and continue to fly, a kind of perpetual motion machine that's going to allow a set of slime blocks to fly off into the distance. And it's a little bit easier to demonstrate than it is to explain. So what we're going to do is set up a piston here with a row of slime blocks attached to it like so. We're going to set up another sticky piston. These do have to be sticky pistons, by the way, and take out these two blocks under here because we're going to be placing a bunch of slime blocks adjacent to this piston as well. And now these two pistons are effectively going to be pushing and pulling each other whenever some redstone signal is sent into them. Now, the last thing we need to add here is an observer facing this way so that the redstone signal fires into this piston, and this way so the redstone signal fires into this piston. And that, in a nutshell, is a slime block flying machine. It's a little bit weird, and this is something that only really works in Java Edition because of the quasi-connectivity I mentioned in previous episodes. The observers aren't actually sending power into a block here, but this piston is receiving power diagonally because of this mysterious quasi-connectivity. And now, when I activate this observer, we have a slime block flying machine. It just kind of disappears into the distance without us doing anything to it. And the reason it's doing that is because each time the observer moves, it sends another redstone signal to the piston, and the other observer is doing the same thing. So effectively, this piston is pushing, and it's pulling the other one with it. Other people's tutorials will explain these in a lot more detail, and probably a lot better than I have, but as you can see, it's going. That will just go until it leaves render distance or collides with an immovable object, which, to be honest, I think that mountain over there might be, so I'm actually going to fly over and see what it does to this mountain once it reaches it. Now, if I'm right, it should end up connecting with a couple of blocks around here, and if it's unable to push or drag them, the slime blocks are going to get stuck. Yep, there we go, and it's going to come to a complete stop, because this cannot be pushed because it's got a lot of blocks adjacent to it, and that is where our flying machine actually separates. And I've tried to make it fly away again, but it looks like that is kind of budded. There we go. Okay, so that piston needs to have an update. We'll place another sticky piston there and see if we can do something about it this time. Yep, there we go, and it's on its way back. So that should stop on the opposite side as well. And so, oh, it's taken a bit of the mountain with it, though, as a souvenir. So we're going to be using these slime block flying machines in future episodes. In particular, I want to use one to set up the double blaze spawner in the nether. And I can imagine a few people are already thinking, wait a minute, there are better ways to set up a double blaze spawner. Yes, there are, but I feel like we should introduce flying machines into this series now, because I have a couple of fun things I want to do with these in future, and the blaze spawner is going to be kind of experiment number 1 for that. So we're going to tackle the blaze spawner next week with a couple of these flying machines and see what we can do with those. But until then, I think that's probably going to be it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide, as the flying machine over there comes into rest. I'm going to say thank you guys so much for watching the Minecraft Survival Guide. Don't forget to leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. Go out and do some experiments with slime blocks, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.